What do you do if you have a lodging issue in your soybeans or another crop? Well, here's our first piece of advice. Don't call the seed dealer. Yes, I know there's some differences from one variety to the next, believe me, but there are many other steps you can take regardless of whatever variety you plant.
The other thing we want to blame is something we can't control. Wind. Well, it must have been just terrible winds. But you know what? Many times I see this lodged field that's getting blamed on the wind, and right across the fence, there's a field that's not lodged. So if the wind was the cause, shouldn't it have been the same across all hybrids? So there's certainly some differences in the management from one field to the next. That's what we want to focus on, what you can control today.
All right, here's the first thing that I'm always going to bring up whenever I see a lodging issue is I want to look at your soil test and see what your base saturation K levels are. If you're not at least 4% K, you're probably going to have some issues sooner or later. And if you're going for big time yields, you might even want to be in that 6 to 8% range for base saturation K. I can just tell you from personal experience, where we've really bumped the K levels, we've gotten a lot thicker stalk. And I don't care if it's soybeans or wheat or corn, whatever crop it is, we want good levels of K in that plant.
Well, it's not just K, it's also copper and manganese. And when we think about those nutrients, you say, wait a minute, I don't focus my fertility program on them. You should be focusing on those nutrients too, because they play a role in many functions within the plant, including making a good solid stalk and producing the lignin to hold that stalk stiff and upright.
Okay, one of the other things too, we just talked about, hey, we want to have good high levels of potassium, copper, and manganese. Great, but you know what? We want lower levels of nitrogen. Yes, lower levels of nitrogen. If you overdo it, and I'm not saying don't have the right level of nitrogen, I'm just saying don't overdo it as much as you can help it on the nitrogen deal. You know, the good thing here is we're talking a lot more today about spoon feeding nitrogen anyway, especially with lighter soils and higher yield levels. But the more you can split apply that nitrogen, put it on when the plant actually needs it, as opposed to super early in the season when the plant doesn't need so much nitrogen, you're going to find less overall height to the plant, but hopefully more yield and less lodging. So when I look at 2017, for example, we saw some really tall soybeans, exceptionally tall. A lot of that went all the way back to 2016 because we had the latest fall we've ever had. A lot of people in the upper Midwest even, it was Thanksgiving before they had a killing frost. Thanksgiving, it's unbelievable. So what happened is all through those fall months, there's a lot more mineralization of the soil, and we found soil nitrate levels very, very high. So what that meant going into 2017 is there was excess nitrogen in almost every field. That led to a lot more top growth, that led to a lot more white mold problem, a lot more lodging problem in 2017. So it really stemmed back to, hey, there was a lot more nitrogen sitting out there than we thought, and then a lot of people applied normal rates of nitrogen, which made it even worse.
Well, the other side of this too, Brian, is that the economics aren't great in farming right now. So when you're going to cut back and you look at a soil test and you say, well, I've got enough parts per million of K out there, I'm just going to cut back there. But guys aren't cutting back on the nitrogen. They're at least putting out what that crop needs. And now what we've created is that imbalance that we often talk about, that a balance of fertility is so important for our plants. We just got things a little out of whack. Now, the other couple of factors that I want to focus on are insects and diseases, and certainly we saw in 2017 both of those prevalent in many crops. Let me talk first about the disease. When you look at cornfields across the country, we saw more anthracnose, more fusarium, gibberella, a number of different stalk rot type issues. Part of it stemmed back to a cool spring. So for a lot of farmers, they're putting corn in the ground in cool, wet conditions, leaving us more prone to getting infection early in the season that's going to result in poor quality stalks later on in the season. In soybeans, we saw some of the same things, but in many cases it was due to late season cool and wet conditions. And I talked to guys all across the soybean growing areas of our country that say, you know, we were a little cooler than normal in August, and it really made a difference. We saw more diseases pop up late. Even the guys that had sprayed a fungicide at R3 were seeing disease come in at R5 or R6 and compromising the stem quality.
Here's the last thing I wanted to talk about: excessive population. Now, I'm not saying, oh, everybody's planting way too many plants, but what I am saying is, let's say you got a field or two or just areas in certain fields where you find lodging is a real challenge. Maybe cutting back that population will help a little bit. It should make the stalk just a little bit bigger. So it's something I want you to consider going into this next year. Maybe it's variable population planting, something like that, but when you hit those areas, maybe cut that population back a little bit, and that absolutely should help reduce your lodging issues.
Lodging can be a huge challenge out on farms in many different crops, especially if it happens early in the season or below where your seed is at. So if it's below the ear on corn or low in the plant on soybeans, where you can't harvest that seed, you're going to have a huge loss. You can solve it many times with fertility issues focusing on potassium, copper, and manganese, but also be on the lookout for plant diseases and insects that could get in the way too.
Excessive weeds can also lead to lodging problems. We'll talk about our Weed of the Week coming up next.